They had just won. The dressing room was loud. The players were celebrating a 2-1 victory over Ecuador that had sent Mexico into the round of 16 of the World Cup they were co-hosting. Their fans were in the streets. The noise outside the stadium was the noise of a country that had been waiting for this moment and could finally exhale. And in the middle of all of it, every player on the squad was wearing a Rolex watch. They had been given a few hours earlier by a YouTuber with 3.7 million Instagram followers, who had walked into their training facility and told them, in front of cameras that were rolling the whole time, that everything was free because he had bet $2 million on them and they had just made him very rich. The footage went everywhere. Players smiling, watches on wrists, a celebration that looked for a few hours like one of the most joyful and unusual stories the 2026 World Cup had produced. And then FIFA stepped in. Within hours of the videos spreading across every social media platform, the Mexican Football Federation released a statement. Brief, official, exact in its language in the way that statements released under pressure tend to be exact. The squad, it said, had by mutual agreement decided to return the watches to the content creator. Over $1 million in luxury gifts, given, celebrated, filmed, posted, and then handed back. And the question that the football world immediately started asking was not about the watches. It was about something bigger, about the rules that govern the sport at its highest level, about who is allowed to give what to whom and why, about whether the line between celebrating a football team and influencing one has any clear definition at all. This is the story of what happened to Mexico's Rolex watches, and why it matters far beyond one squad celebrating a World Cup win. Steven Delinardis is better known by his online name, Steve Will Do It. A content creator whose brand is built around the specific kind of extravagant, uninhibited generosity that generates clicks and followers, and the kind of engagement that platforms reward. He gives things away. He bets large amounts of money on live streams. He does the kind of things that most people cannot do and some people cannot look away from. He has built an audience of millions on exactly that combination. And he lives in Mexico. He said so himself, in the video that documented the watch distribution. I live in Mexico, he told the players, and I bet $2 million on you guys. So everything is free. The bet had been placed before the Ecuador match. $2 million on Mexico to win. When they did, winning 2-1, Delinardis had already purchased a Rolex watch for every member of the squad and every member of staff. The total value exceeded $1 million. He had bought them before the match as a gesture of confidence. And after the final whistle, he delivered them. The players who had just come off the pitch after one of the most important victories in Mexican football in decades were photographed and filmed wearing the watches. Some were still in their kits. The clips had the specific energy of unscripted celebration, nothing staged, nothing formal, just a group of athletes who had won something important, and were in the company of someone who had prepared a very expensive thank you. The video went everywhere. Delinardis posted to his 3.7 million Instagram followers, describing what he had done in the characteristically enthusiastic language of his brand. Mexico dominated Ecuador, he said. He was right. He had been confident enough in that to spend $1 million on watches before the match. And now he was celebrating the outcome the way his audience expected him to celebrate everything. For a few hours, it was simply a good story. Unusual, extravagant, the kind of thing that sits in the margin of a World Cup week, generates conversation, and gives sports fans something to discuss that has nothing to do with tactics or VAR controversies or the geopolitical complexities of tournament logistics. And then people started reading the rules. FIFA's Code of Ethics is a document that governs the conduct of everyone involved in the professional game at the international level. Players, officials, agents, federation executives, the people who run the World Cup, and the people who participate in it. The document is specific, comprehensive, and largely invisible to the casual football audience until a situation arises that forces it into view. Article 20 of that code addresses gifts. The relevant language is precise. Gifts and other advantages may be offered or accepted only if they have symbolic or trivial value. That phrase, symbolic or trivial, is the phrase that turns a Rolex watch into a violation rather than a celebration. A Rolex watch does not have symbolic or trivial value. It has significant monetary value. Multiple of them, purchased simultaneously for an entire squad, have a collective value that exceeds $1 million. Whatever the spirit of the gesture, however genuine the celebration, however little anyone involved intended anything improper, the watches were gifts. They were expensive gifts. They were given to active players at an active World Cup. and they were given by someone who had publicly declared a $2 million financial stake in the outcome of a match those same players had just played. That last detail is the one that makes the FIFA Code of Ethics most directly applicable. The rule, as explained by FIFA licensed agent Joseph Adamfio in coverage of the story, is designed to ensure that football professionals do not give or receive gifts or benefits that could unfairly influence their decisions. FIFA wants to prevent bribery and corruption while maintaining fairness in football. The rule exists not because anyone suspects a player of being corrupt. It exists because a world governing body, administering the most watched sporting event on earth, cannot leave the appearance of influence unaddressed simply because the intentions involved were benign. And the specific circumstances of this situation created exactly the kind of appearance the rule is designed to prevent. A person with a known, documented, publicly announced financial interest in the result of a football match had given expensive luxury items to the players who determined that result. That the gifts were given in the spirit of celebration rather than inducement is not the question the rule asks. The rule asks whether expensive gifts were given by someone with a financial stake in the outcome to the players who produced the outcome. The answer was yes. The conclusion followed. FIFA's investigation was reportedly opened immediately. The Mexican Football Federation did not wait to see how the investigation concluded. The federation released its statement within hours, confirming that the players had agreed to return everything. The Rolexes went back to Delinardis. The federation used the language of mutual agreement, describing the decision as one the players had made together. That framing matters. It positions the return not as a punishment, but as a collective act of responsibility, which is both accurate and useful when a World Cup squad is 3 days away from the most significant match it has played in decades. Mexico were preparing for England at the Azteca, in a round of 16 match that carried the specific weight of everything the Azteca always carries. The ground that hosted 2 World Cup finals. The ground where Maradona scored both of his most famous goals within minutes of each other, in 1986, the hand of God and the goal of the century. A stadium where England have not had happy historical associations, and where Mexico's football identity has been written across generations of supporters who know every stone of the building. The Rolex story could have become a distraction from that match, in a way that the Federation clearly understood would serve nobody. Getting the watches back quickly, publicly, and with a language of mutual agreement, rather than external compulsion, allowed the Federation to close the chapter before it consumed the week. But the question the chapter raises did not close with it. Because the specific thing that makes this situation interesting is not the outcome. Mexico returned the watches, the Federation handled it responsibly. The players complied without apparent conflict. The story in its operational sense resolved itself quickly, and without lasting damage to anyone involved. What is interesting is the territory the story sits in. The territory between celebrating an athlete and influencing one. The territory where modern content creation, social media, and the enormous financial ecosystems that have grown around elite sport interact in ways that the rules were not designed to address when they were written. Delinardis did not give those watches expecting anything in return. He had already won his bet. The money had come in. The watches were a thank you, not a payment. There is no reasonable interpretation of events in which a YouTuber distributing Rolexes to a team that had already played their match and already won it was attempting to influence the result of that match. And yet the rule applies anyway. Because the rule is not primarily about outcomes. It is about appearances, about the perception of influence, about the institutional need of a governing body to demonstrate that no financial interest, however transparently celebratory, can connect to the players whose on-field decisions determine results that others have wagered money on. That institutional need creates a situation that is worth examining seriously rather than dismissing as bureaucratic overreach. Because the world of modern football fandom, online culture, and content creation is one in which exactly these kinds of connections form constantly. Influencers attend matches. They interact with players. They document those interactions for audiences of millions. They create commercial partnerships and betting content, and the kind of financial engagement with sporting events that simply did not exist in the scale it now exists when the rules governing elite sport were written. The Rolex situation is unusual in its specificity and its scale. One person, one bet, $1 million in gifts, one squad, one viral moment. But the underlying dynamic it represents is not unusual at all. It is the daily reality of how elite athletes interact with the online world in 2026, where the line between fan celebration and financial interest is drawn in places that nobody negotiated and nobody fully understands. Should football stars be allowed to accept expensive gifts during a World Cup? The answer the rules give is simple: no. unless the gift has symbolic or trivial value. The answer that the reality of modern football culture suggests is more complicated, because the people giving those gifts are often doing so from a place of genuine enthusiasm rather than calculated influence. And the players receiving them are adults, making individual decisions about their own conduct in environments that have changed completely since the rules were designed. England, Brazil, Argentina, France, any squad at any World Cup faces the same regulatory environment that Mexico navigated this week. Any player from any of those squads who accepted a significant gift from someone with a publicly known financial interest in a match outcome would be in the same position the Mexican squad found itself in. The specific combination of events that produced this situation is unusual. The exposure it creates is not. FIFA's investigation into the matter was ongoing as this video was produced. What consequences, if any, result from it, for De Leonardis, for the Federation, or for individual players who wore the watches while they were still believed to be acceptable gifts, remains to be seen. The Federation's swift action in returning everything may well be considered a significant mitigating factor in whatever process follows. What cannot be mitigated is the broader conversation the story opened about the rules governing elite sport in an era of content creation and social media influence, about whether those rules are proportionate to the situations they address, about what FIFA is protecting when it enforces them so quickly and so completely that an entire squad returns $1 million in gifts within hours of receiving them, 3 days before the most important match they are scheduled to play. FIFA would say it is protecting the integrity of the competition. The principle that the results of World Cup matches should be determined by nothing other than what happens on the pitch, uncontaminated by any financial interest or the appearance of any financial influence, however indirect, however well-intentioned. That is not a frivolous position. It is the foundation on which the credibility of the competition rests. A World Cup that can be perceived to have results influenced by money, even in the most indirect and celebratory way, is a World Cup whose results cannot be fully trusted. And a World Cup whose results cannot be fully trusted is not worth the infrastructure and investment and global attention that makes it the most powerful sporting event in existence. The watches went back. Mexico prepared for England. The Azteca waited. And somewhere in the return of $1 million in Rolex watches, quietly and without the drama of a scandal, but with the specific clarity of a rule being enforced in a situation that exposed exactly how complicated modern football's relationship with modern money has become, was a reminder that the World Cup operates by rules that predate the era it now exists in. Whether those rules are adequate for that era is a question that a YouTuber with 3.7 million followers and a $2 million bet has now forced FIFA to think about out loud. Sometimes the biggest controversies of a World Cup are not decided on the pitch. Sometimes they are decided by an article in an ethics code that nobody reads until someone walks into a training ground with a box full of Rolexes and a camera. What do you think? Was FIFA right to make Mexico return the Rolex watches, or did football overreact? Let us know in the comments.